before. So my name is Jessica Bellamy, and a lot like everyone in this room, I wear a lot of hats. Everybody does it. I'm not only an infographic designer, I'm a community organizer, I'm a research analyst, I'm also a social entrepreneur. That's a lot of things to say, and we're going to talk about it, don't worry. But that's how I want to introduce this. So my journey started, I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky. How many people have been to Louisville? Yeah, that's right. Love it, love it. You've probably heard of the University of Louisville, especially if you like college basketball. You've heard of us, all that scandal last year. But that's where I got my 3 degrees, but also where I became a research analyst working in neurodevelopmental sciences. It's a mouthful, but I started working with data at a pretty early on in college, not just because of my coursework, but also because I literally started working in a lab, in a psychology lab, that worked with participants with developmental delays and disorders and so forth and so on. And so not only was I making observational reports and taking all this data and finding new ways to visualize them and create them in different students' dissertations and collecting data. It was interesting, it was fun, it was challenging, I liked this work, so I did it for about 5 years, but I wasn't fully fulfilled. So in my spare time during those years, I was also doing a lot of community organizing. I was working within a couple of networks in Louisville that were, some of which were statewide organizations and some that were local, but doing a lot of economic justice work, sometimes just at the micro level in neighborhoods, and sometimes on a larger scale of the state itself. It was very good. It was filling me, I think, on a personal level and a social level. And, I was being challenged at work, but something was missing. And then I happened to be a part of an amazing project, which I want to tell you about, that hopefully will inspire and galvanize some of your brave aspirations. Marina's talk really spoke to me because I definitely know that trying to call your voice and trying to figure out how to bring it sort of conversation and finding yourself. And this is kind of a little bit of that embedded into this. So Marina, this is part 2. All right, so I became an information graphic designer because of this very specific project. Like, I already had gotten graphic design training in school. I had even turned a lot of papers into infographics and when I was in college, and then did a little bit of that when I was doing my research analyst gig. But I also had such a passion for mobilizing data, becoming a data storyteller. And so I do static work, but I also do motion graphics. Is it playing? Oh. Well, it's not playing, but that's okay. Just know that a lot of things happen and things start moving. It's awesome. It's cool. You can find me on Instagram. We've got so many things. But anyways, and I had a really great opportunity to really develop a lot of these motion graphic skills when I did the residency last year. And what the Adobe Creative Residency is, if you haven't heard of it before, is just where Adobe gives creatives, like a small cohort of international designers, the opportunity to pursue a passion project for a year. And not only did I want to develop my motion infographic skills, but I wanted to start sharing out what I've learned. 4 years ago, I started a design agency solely around social change and infographics. But I had learned so much along the way about conscious and responsible design, data equity and transparency, about power dynamics in design, and how it all related to the community organizing work that I was doing before. So one thing I started doing was I wanted there to be more access to information design, even for folks that aren't trained in software. So I started creating tools like this, like the infographic wheel, which I did bring some with me, and they're available for purchase, but it doesn't matter. Or you just look at it if you want to, because they're cool. But it just helps people figure out what type of infographic layout to use based on the characteristics of the data that they have. Because as we're moving more so and more so into this like visual world, right? We're all visual communicators, and that's how we relate to others and how we engage our world around us. It's more important for people, not just designers, not just people that work in data, to start thinking about how to design numbers and how to tell stories using personal narratives and data. So that's why I'm into things like that. When I started doing workshops, I did 15 over the course of last year, all around the country. They were great. And in every single one, we left assets behind, like me and a group of creatives. And creatives is not, like I said, it's not just design folks. Like some of the conferences and events were literally like they were teachers, they were students, all sorts of folks learning how to make infographics and leaving assets behind for those nonprofits. And that's what I did last year. There was a lot of that. Plus learning motion graphic design, which you can check on Instagram since my video didn't work. But what I'm getting to is 4 years ago, before the residency, before all these things, I created GRIDS, which stands for the Grassroots Information Design Studio. I felt so inspired by one specific project. I'm definitely revving it up because I want you to feel it. One specific project that I took a leap of faith and created a very, very niche design agency. Because think about it, it only specializes in infographic design, but specifically for the nonprofit sector, community groups, making explainers and reports, but only with social change community strategies. That's a very niche market. That takes a lot of confidence to jump into something like that. So where my story begins is a neighborhood called Smoketown. Smoketown is the oldest historically black neighborhood in Louisville. It was started back in the 1860s. It was the only place that African Americans were allowed to live in the city. Okay. It's also where I'm from. That's my grandma. She has a restaurant in Smoketown. My whole family goes there, works there, everybody. So if you go there, everyone you meet I'm related to. She's also my mother. So I'm definitely embedded in that community. And they've been putting on community events since, well, way before I was even conceived. Before I was a twinkle in my mother's eye. They were doing different things in the community and being active. Because of course, like being a predominantly low opportunity community where there's not as many resources, the infrastructure is crumbling, people make do with what they got and they pull together. It's that type of neighborhood, right? And about 6 years ago, there was a lot of changes happening in Smoketown. Smoketown is right next to the urban core of Louisville. And the urban core, that's where you got like your Hard Rock cafes and, we're famous for the Kentucky Derby, so a lot of bourbon distilleries and things. It's great. But the urban core wanted to develop outwards. So you had a lot of developers that started buying up the cheap properties in Smoketown, and a lot of people that already owned properties were finding ways to kick out the residents. So there was a lot of displacement happening. We lost a lot of our assets, like our community center, so forth and so on. So when you start displacing people in large numbers, you can't say that you're providing services to XYZ number of people if you just lost however many people because this housing project is now gone. So they lost funding and they had to close. A lot of changes were happening, and now you're starting to see people trying to even rename Smoketown. One person tried to name it the Creative Innovation Zone, saying that they're going to move in artists and stuff. And all this can sound good from one perspective, but for the people that were there, why isn't anyone asking them questions of what they would like to see? No one's saying that change isn't good, but not all development is good, right? And so these conversations weren't happening. One thing that me and a group of other community organizers at the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth did was we started surveying the residents to ask them, what is their vision for Smoketown? We had a 51-question survey. We went door to door, and we would literally sit there on people's porches and just start filling out papers. We did this for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, collected all this data, and we're like, okay, we're going to make some type of report. We want to give it to different policymakers. We want to give it to developers. Let it be a guide for what the do's and don'ts are. But also, like, since there are so many resources coming into the community, how can they be leveraged, like, for the benefit of current assets, right? For the benefit of current residents. So when we put this report together, we had all this data, we realized nobody's going to read this. This is just a huge chunk of text. What can we do? So we didn't have much time left, and I said, well, I'll make some infographics for it. And I did. I made a bunch of infographics over the course of a weekend. No, I didn't sleep. Yes, I mixed Monster and coffee together. Things happen. That decision for me. But it's okay. The report came out. It was really great. It was wildly popular. And because of what it was saying and the way that we released it and organized information, it was talked about in the media. And for the first time, I can't remember the actual first time that he was ever challenged in, but there was a council member for that district who had never been challenged on such a public level, is what I'll say. And so he said, well, I'm going to go to Smoketown and speak to the people. So there was this huge forum. A lot of people showed up, a lot of residents, and of course he was there. And every issue people could raise, even something as minimal of why don't we have any public trash cans, he would find a reason why they can't have public trash cans. I'm serious, this is an argument that happened. But anyways, so what really inspired me in this moment during this project was a person that jumped up had another thing like, hey, why can't we see this type of change? Well, I would like to see this thing happen, a very specific thing. And Councilmember Tandy jumped up and he was like, no, sorry, we can't do it because X, Y, and Z, just like he had done all day. But then that resident whipped out the report and said, well, what you just said makes no sense because of this, that, and the other. And I was like, oh my gosh, did he just pull out a sword from his sheath? I felt like I made a weapon. Like they were actively arguing. They were practically yelling at each other, but he wasn't wrong cannot be refuted. The data was there, it was published. It's already been in the newspaper. What could he say? He couldn't make his normal rhetoric to just argue around something and make no change happen like he was used to. That was the most powerful moment of my professional career. I can't say that I knew that I would create an agency around something like that, but that moment showed me that that's where I needed to devote my talents and my time. Because I was also pulling together a lot of different things that I developed and cultivated skill-wise in myself. So it was great. But yeah, I created grids, my leap of faith. And what I want to share with you are some of the things that I've learned along the way. I have more content like this that goes even deeper, but I only have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to get through as much as I can. All right, so first I want to talk about equity. How many people have heard of equity in a social change sort of sense? Everyone can't stop up on equity. So all equity really is really when a process is inclusive, cooperative, and considerate, then it's equitable. Because what equity is all about is about extending opportunities and raising potential. And you can only do that if you have a comprehensive knowledge around an issue. And you can only do that if you have a lot of perspectives. And if you're willing to be flexible and accountable in how you proceed. That's a really complex definition, but you're going to hear more stories and antidotes. This is embedded through all my work. Reciprocity. So reciprocity is just about practicing being just as invested, having just as much respect, putting just as much energy into work as the people around you. It's about something being reciprocal. So there's a difference between working with and for. And if you enter a conversation, enter a room, enter a project with the idea that you're working for someone rather than with someone, it's going to show in the way that you demonstrate your work. What we're usually used to as designers, especially if we try to do something that's like pro bono, something that's out of, that's the feel-good work, right? Sometimes we forget that just because we're experts in the design realm doesn't mean that we're experts on the issue. We got to check ourselves. And the best way to do that is to acknowledge that design has a lot of privilege in it, right? Design defines narrative, and it creates credibility and authority. Let's be real. If we have two nonprofits that are competing for the same funding, which happens all the time, there's several that compete for the same funding. If one nonprofit has a logo that was made by Janet from accounting's nephew, like back in '03, that doesn't mean that the quality of the work of that nonprofit is poor, right? But sometimes the way it can read is like, oh, well, this looks like it's an older nonprofit. They may not be as relevant today, or maybe they won't be around very long because people don't seem as invested because the quality of this makes me infer X. A lot of times that happens, especially when you have a lot of competing nonprofits that have that cutting edge look, that identity system that's so clean and contemporary. It divides, right? It creates a hierarchy. Does that make sense? But what I'm saying is when you start to understand those power dynamics in design and start to apply it, not only will you see yourself as see everyone at the table as equals, but you'll also realize what design mistakes you're making, right? And what mistakes you're making in your whole process of planning a project and bringing it to fruition. Because we have to think about recursivity. Recursivity and reciprocity go together so well, because when I talk about recursivity, I'm talking about recursive feedback cycles. As designers, we get so used to the feedback part being during the drafting stage, right? Where we get feedback from the client. But one thing I've done a lot in my career is when I'm in a client conversation about the project before it starts, I'm also in a conversation about, well, the people that are most affected by this issue, when are they coming? Are they already here? Because if I'm also trying to make really robust, impactful work, like a campaign really have longevity, I need the people that are most affected by the issue, who are subject matter experts, the actual subject matter experts, right? And the main reason is because they're going to know the root causes, they're going to know realistic solutions, they're going to have the buy-in to the community that you need, maybe even have the language that you need to have incorporated, and they should also lead it, because not all problems that nonprofits have actually have design solutions. That kind of goes back to the equity, honestly. Because we can't just keep forcing solutions that aren't realistic, because we are trained as designers Just like, I was listening to Marina so much, but yeah, it's so true. She said that we are solution-based. Like, our ideology is all about solutions. And sometimes you gotta spend time thinking and actually revisit, is my solution right now actually for this project? It might not be for me to say, it might be more so for the most affected population to say. And if they're there, they're gonna check you to make sure that the way that you're representing the issue and representing the most vulnerable population that's involved in that issue, if you're representing them authentically, if you're mindful and sensitive in that portraiture, and have you actually disaggregated your data, which just means, is the data you're using actually telling the story? Those are some things to think about. Another thing to think about are progressive economies of design. That's a really big way of saying alternative ways to think about money. So you have like design agencies like Catapult Design, which is like here in San Francisco, it's a nonprofit that does design work. You have Civic Creatives, which is another social enterprise, much like Grids, but it's located in St. Louis. And you have like the Design Action Collective, which is a cooperative that's in Oakland. They're most famously known for creating the identity system for Black Lives Matter. These are some very different models of design that I had no idea existed when I started Grids, but allowed me to find mentors so that I can create things around the new economy movement. When you start to think about money differently, you start to treat people differently. So Grids has this inclusive business model. I'm gonna hurry up because I'm running out of time. That at the foundation is traditional social enterprise. Our principles meet, let's talk, let's work, and the pay is exactly what the rate we set. We have weighted social enterprise, and maybe you might like alter the price to be a little bit lower for that specific group. You also have new economy enterprise. Is there a resource you can exchange? I've absolutely exchanged assets to supplement the cost for a client. And that's fine, because I still get the resources, especially if it involves marketing. That whole first year of Grids was I did not have to market once. I didn't do social media, I didn't have any handbills, I had business cards. I have business cards. But I did not have to, because I had so much word of mouth. I had so much word of mouth, which was a powerful teacher, right? And of course, you have your impact investment, which is where you donate your talents. But here's a couple of tips. I'm gonna run through 30 seconds for low design opportunity clients. If you're designing for a client that maybe can't fully afford your services, think about where they're printing. They're printing in-house. Maybe don't use bleeds. Nobody knows what bleeds are, but designers and printers, that's it. Nobody knows. Maybe talk to some different printers in your area so you can create affordable rates that you can share, right? Consult. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to nonprofits and they pay for an hour of my time, and literally Janet's nephew comes and shows me all the things he's made. And I'm like, all right, let's talk about it. Let's work it through and see what's working, what's not, and why, right? You can think about familiar software. I may design using Adobe Creative Suite, but that doesn't mean that's what I share out with my clients. Sometimes it might be in Word, because it's easier and accessible. Sometimes I even suggest like some free software that is easy to use. Y'all know Spark. Spark is amazing. Spark has changed our lives. You can also minimize your design time. I create a lot of templates beforehand that clients can look at, pick something, because I do a lot of reports, and decide like this is the report I want to use, and the contract they sign says like I acknowledge that other people might use this report, but it's just going to be customized for my needs. Minimizes my time, which minimizes their cost. And here's the list of all 6 things I just said. Thank you for your time.